All right. So this is the start of our presentation. So thanks so much for being here tonight. We do this every year, and we've been lucky enough to get Lance to come out to Austin for many of the last several years. So we call it our Practice Makes Pitch Perfect workshop. It is just an opportunity for us before our conference in June to talk about how we pitch, and especially usually when we're leading up to the Agents and Editors Conference, for those of you who have been there, that's the time when we're bringing authors together, writers together in person with industry folks. And so it's always nice to have a little bit of time before that to think about how you pitch your work and how you're going to talk about it in front of somebody on the spot, either in a general session or after a panel when you only have a few minutes. So obviously this year is different. We're not doing a conference where we're bringing people face-to-face with a lot of agents and editors, but we wanted to keep this tradition going, and we thought we would adapt it to our current moment, really probably focus a little more on query letters versus pitching in person. But also we asked you guys to send any questions our way that you had, and we got a lot of really great questions that I think is going to help us with sort of a roadmap for the evening. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to start though with introductions. You guys don't need to hear us read our bios. So instead, we're going to just tell you a little bit about who we are and why we feel like we're prepared and able to share some strategies with you on pitching. I also want to mention that you all should have received an email with a mysterious line of text in it, maybe a few lines for some of you. So hold on to those, because all will be revealed later in the program. But we're going to start with a presentation, and then we'll get to the fun and games that'll involve that text. So Lance,
Becca,
who the heck are you? Like,
who the heck am I?
Why should we listen to you?
Why should you listen to me is the big question. My name is Lance Fitzgerald, as Becca said, and I've recently changed jobs. I am now the VP for Content and Business Development for the Penguin Random House Audio Division. And what that means is I am overseeing an editorial team that is bringing in content to be published as audiobooks. So my job has changed. I used to be a rights director, which meant I was pitching all the time to people. And now I'm receiving pitches. I'm on the other side of the table. Agents are sending me submissions now. I'm hearing directly from people. Here's something I want to publish on audiobook. And what's really interesting is I have to take that pitch if I buy something and flip it. And then I have to take that pitch and present it to our sales force and our publicity and our marketing team. So I spend a lot of my time pitching, and that's why I'm here.
Yeah, and you're really good at it. Thank
you, I try. I learned it all from you.
That's not possible because you're clearly much older than I am. I'm just kidding. All right. I love him. So you guys have heard me say who I am a few times, I'm sure, but I'm, before I joined the Writers League of Texas here as the executive director, I was a literary agent for a number of years, and I also worked in publishing. So I both sat inside a publishing house, similar to what Lance does now, listening to or being a part of editorial meetings where projects were discussed, but then as a rights person, which is something that Lance far exceeded me in his career in. I would pitch foreign publishers, so French publishers, German publishers. I would pitch magazines, excerpts from our books, and then finally, as a literary agent, I received a lot of queries. So I've read a lot of queries. I've figured out what catches my eye and what's compelling to me. And I think that together, Lance and I are going to be able to give you some tips tonight for whatever you might be pitching. So let's get to it. This was the first question we thought we would tackle. Why do I need to pitch? So this is probably fairly easy to answer, but I think it's a great question to start with, because Yeah, we're writers. We're spending our time in our offices or in whatever space we're in. We're working, we're writing. Everything should really be about the craft. And when you enter this business part of it, it becomes something completely different, right? And different muscles that we have to stretch, and it's can be uncomfortable. So why do it? And there's a couple of reasons. The first and most basic reason would be that if you are going to be in a situation where you are face to face with someone, you're going to want to be able to explain to them what your project is in a pretty succinct way, right? But also, we think that learning how to pitch your project can be something that's just helpful for you in general as a writer. It can help you. What you'll do to hone your pitch and craft your pitch is really going to allow you to examine your project in a way that's probably also going to help you as you continue to develop that project, or maybe as you tackle a revision of that project. So we think that it's always good for writers to examine their writing and think about what makes it interesting, what makes it compelling, how they can talk about it in a way that's going to gather some interest, and in the process probably learn some new things themselves. Is that right, Lance?
That is right. I think one of the other really great things about having a pitch is then you've got it in your pocket for when you're at a cocktail party or a barbecue and someone says, oh, you're a writer, what's your book about? And you immediately are able to speak about your book in an intelligent, kind of personal feeling way, as opposed to being like, well, I don't really know. You'll be able to answer that question.
Yeah. We want to say that we don't think anyone should go to a cocktail party or a barbecue right now.
They should be socially distanced if they're going,
yes,
or in a mask. So you just pitch your book like this.
Or you get a mask with your pitch on it.
Oh, marketing for the unconference.
All right. So next question, what is a pitch?
So we like to play a game when we're answering what is a pitch, and we like to start with what a pitch is not. And tonight we're going to give you some examples of what a pitch isn't. Becca, you want to go first?
I do. Lance, I want to tell you about my book.
Okay.
My book is about Bob. He's a banker. It's about his wife, Joan. She is a long distance runner. It's about their cousin, Susie. She really hasn't figured out what she's doing with her life. And then you have their kids, Tyler, Pipsqueak, and Toto, who are all just different personalities moving through the world. And there are really several other people I could tell you about if you'd like. Should I?
Please don't. Please don't. Becca, what's wrong with that pitch?
So that is to say that a pitch is not a cast of characters. So I think sometimes when we have a project, and especially our characters are so precious to us, right? And we want to talk about all of them because they all deserve some space. But when you have that really limited time, if it's in person, or when you have really limited space, if it's a query letter, then just remember that if you find yourself listing character after character, that's not an effective pitch. Lance, what about you?
Becca, can I tell you about my book?
Sure.
My book is about humanity's yearning for love.
Coming in?
My book is about humanity's yearning for love.
What is wrong with that?
What is wrong with that is that it's just theme. A pitch can't just be theme. Your pitch needs to include information. It has to be able to get across some things we'll talk about later: the who, the where, the what, the when. Make the book interesting and draw people in.
And I say this often in a query letter class that I teach, that sometimes I notice that I'm being kept at arm's length from a description. And I think theme is a great example of that you're sort of keeping me at arm's length. You're giving me some big sweeping idea, but you're not really telling me what your book is.
Becca, this is actually a real life example. There was the one Frankfurt where someone pitched a book as, I have a book, it's about two women and friendship. And that was the entire pitch.
Yeah, we talked about it for days. Yeah. And that's a start, but it was a little too, you want a little more than that, right?
Yeah.
So Lance, I want to tell you about my book.
Okay.
What if your deepest desire came true?
What if?
So we, that example is leading us to the point that I'm sure you guys have heard before, that a pitch is not a question, that oftentimes we like to, I think, lean back on the crutch of asking a question that we know the answer to. But actually that's not a great effective pitch. And I know a lot of agents who are turned off by questions in query letters or in pitches in general.
Becca, can I tell you about my book?
Sure.
So my book is about Jack. And one morning, Jack woke up and he went to the store. And he went to the store and he bought some milk. And then he met a woman who was buying some eggs. And he asked for her number. And then he waited the appropriate 2 days to call her. And then he called her. And then they went out for dinner the following Tuesday. And they had spaghetti, but they couldn't have garlic bread because she is gluten intolerant. But he is a gastroenterologist and he was able to treat her gluten intolerance, and they fell in love. And then they adopted a dog and a betta fish and got married. Turns out he was an alien all along.
Wow. Yeah, that's a lot of information. And I feel like I only got maybe the first 10 pages of the book there. And then you did something really, I'm going to say annoying, for lack of a better way of saying it.
Oh.
So what were you doing there?
Well, I did a couple of things that were wrong. It was basically a synopsis. I laid out everything that happened in the book from beginning to end. And then even kind of a worse faux pas, I buried the lead. My lead character is an alien. And I didn't bother mentioning that at all until the very end, at which point you had left the room.
Yeah. It is funny though, and I see that someone in the chat said this, we were realizing as we were reading this earlier that it does actually sound like it could be a good book. But you guys know what we're being silly, but you know, the idea of just, I call it and then is not, it's a synopsis, but it's not a pitch. Okay. Moving on. So then one question we had was, what's the difference between a synopsis and a pitch? And I would say that a synopsis is the roadmap to your story. It's usually one page, sometimes more than one page, and it gives you the full picture. So there are not questions in a synopsis. There are not cliffhangers in a synopsis. It really is meant to be the sort of blueprint, I guess you could say, to your book. And a pitch, whether it's a query letter, which is the written pitch, or it's an in-person pitch, which usually happens at a consultation at a conference, that has one goal. And the goal of that is to have somebody ask you to send them pages, to give someone enough information that they want to read more. And so it's very different from a synopsis where you really have to, you're expected to give it all. In a pitch, you can be a little more mysterious, you can hold things back, but you're really just, your goal is to get somebody to want to read more. Anything to add to that, Lance?
No, I think you covered that pretty well.
Okay.
I think it's, yeah.
And it's obviously a lot, I would assume, obviously a lot shorter than a synopsis.
Yes.
So, all right, what's our next question?
Our next question is, what is the difference? What would you include in an in-person pitch that you wouldn't include in a query letter, or vice versa? I think the first thing you include in an in-person pitch is yourself. So that's a big thing to include. You are able to have a conversation in an in-person pitch, which I think is really handy. You know, we were talking just a minute ago about the synopsis versus the pitch and the difference. When you're pitching in person, you're able to answer questions and explain further if people want to ask. So what does that mean about a query letter? A query letter means you need to include all of the relevant information in that page. You have more words that you can use in a query letter than in an in-person pitch. An in-person pitch is really rather short. Whereas the query letter, you have more space, but it should never go more than a page. I'm sure Becca teaches that in her query letter class. We're going to give you some pointers tonight that you should be able to apply to either situation as we go along.
Yeah, and I just want to answer, there's a question in the chat. Do you include any excerpts or quotes from your story in your synopsis? I would say not traditionally, no. That really it's a tool that is meant to take you from the beginning to the end, introduce the major characters, introduce the conflict. And it doesn't need to be in a particular voice, meaning the voice of the story. It really is just, in my mind, I'm sure someone else could give you a slightly different definition, and for sure, read the submission pages of any agency that you're submitting to, and they may tell you a little more about what they're expecting. But I would not include quotes or excerpts from the work. I would just get down to business. And you'll find that a page seems like a lot of space, but it will be really hard to, especially if someone asks you to stick to one page, it'll be a challenge. So, okay. And Evan's gonna collect any other questions, or he's gonna bring them back up as we get towards the end later, if it's something that we don't answer immediately. So, should my pitch change depending on whom I'm addressing, or can I just send, copy and paste and repeat? Lance, what do you think?
I'll take that one. I think one of the things I really like about pitching is that it is fluid. It's ever changing. It can change, when we're at a book fair at Frankfurt or London, and whether it's 3 days or 5 days, that pitch changes multiple times over the course of the week. And you have the advantage in that case of pitching in person, because you can judge someone's their body language and what the reactions are to things you say. And you can say a certain sentence and you can see the person across from you cut off, and you immediately know, next time I talk about this book, I'm not going to use that sentence. And so you can keep adapting it. We did some pitches for tonight. I rewrote mine several times, and even I wrote it yesterday, and even today, Beck and I were working on it, and I was rewriting it as we were going through. It's ever fluid and changing. And then the most important thing that comes with that is practice. So if you are doing an in-person pitch, you want to practice everywhere you can, in the mirror, for your dog, in the car, wherever you can. If you're writing a query letter, write it. I like to say write it, and then you just put it away. Put it away and come back to it later. Let it age a little bit, like a fine wine or a cheese. And then you can pull it back out later and look at it again and find maybe some things you left out, or some things you need to add, or maybe there's a major character you left out. Maybe you said Jack is an alien and you left it till the end of the pitch. So these are things you can do when you write it and put it away and come back to it later.
I would say, in terms of a query letter and the idea of just copy and paste, and whether you need to change a query letter depending on who the agent is that you're addressing it to, you're going to find that some of the stuff we talk about tonight are things that you would personalize for individual agents when you're introducing yourself to them, when you're connecting with them at the start of that letter. But then really, your goal is to find a compelling way to talk about your book, a compelling way to talk about your story and yourself. And I know someone was also asking about whether you're pitching yourself or you're pitching the book, and we'll get to some of that too. But ideally, you're not reinventing the bulk of it every time once you feel like you've gotten to a good place for a query letter, and you're just personalizing it at the top.
Yeah, I would agree. And I know when I used to do submission letters, query letters to, at my previous job, to British publishers, the body of it was always the same. The actual descriptive part of the letter was the same, but the introduction was always personalized.
All right, so we're gonna get to something else if my computer will let me. There we go. So where do I begin with writing my pitch? So at the risk of just boring some of you, we're going to talk about the 4 C's, which some of you may have not heard of, but it's something that we talk about every year when we do this. So, but we're going to shake it up a little bit to make it a little interesting for anyone who's already heard it. But The 4 C's being what we believe is a great sort of scaffold for especially a query letter for any pitch in terms of when you're thinking about what you're going to say, what's important, what you need to keep in, what you could take out. We're going to do it by looking at these 4 different pieces of it. And then we're going to give you some real life examples too as we go along, because we want to keep you guys happy. So the first C, I believe you're going to talk about, Lance. Am I right?
I believe you're going to talk about connection.
I'm going
I
to
thought
talk
we
about
were going to
first.
connect over connection.
We did connect over connection. I'm going to talk about connection. So for the sake of a verbal pitch, connection is just you're simply, at the same conference as an agent. So it's not quite as necessary. And in fact, I think connection can sometimes, if you try to force it or you try to add it to that pitch, you take up valuable time that you could be spending getting right to the point. So in person, it's more natural. But if you are writing a query letter, what you want to think about is showing that agent that you're not wasting their time, honestly, that you've done your research, that you know that they represent the sort of book that you are pitching, and you can reference specifically a client of theirs, which is always great. You can reference a book that they represented. You can take a quote that you heard in an interview that they did or that you read in an interview somewhere and refer to that in a way to connect with them. So it's your opportunity to show them, I'm not just sending this letter out to 100 random people waiting for a response. I've actually thought about it, and I think that what I'm pitching is something that you might be interested in reading. So we're going to get into a couple questions that were connected to connection. When you send a material to an agent that requested them, do you still need a written pitch to go with it? And this is a great question. So if you meet an agent at a conference and then a year later, 2 years later, or 3 months later, you're ready to submit materials, absolutely, I would say you still want to send a query letter with it, even though you met them, even though you pitched them in person, and even though they asked to see it, because the chances of them really being able to remember all of the interesting stuff that you told them in person is slim. But also there may be other pieces to the pitch that you've refined. There might be particular comparison titles that you're going to throw out. So yes, don't just send a portion of a manuscript and say, you asked for this, here it is. Be prepared and write that query letter and send it with that.
I think it's really important to remember that you're trying to make it as easy as possible for the agent to read and refer to your work. And so by giving them that kind of refresher query letter at the beginning of it, it'll trigger something and they'll go, oh, I do remember this book. I did want to read it.
Well, and sometimes that agent may have their assistant read first and they'll pass the material over to the assistant with the letter. And so the assistant will find it helpful to hear the way that you talk about your project if they weren't the person who heard it in person, or that agent might share it with a colleague or anyone else, and it'll be helpful for them to have the query letter too. So definitely don't cut corners there. Where do I find an agent to pitch if I'm not going to a conference or ever leaving my house? I don't know. We're gonna email you all the addresses of some agents. Not really.
Their home addresses.
Their home addresses. Great question. So, obviously right now is an interesting time. So we probably aren't all going to be in a position for a while to pitch agents in person. I know there are some places where you might be able to find an agent online virtually and talk to them. But I would say that this is another reason more than ever that taking the time, if you're ready to get your work out there, if you're ready to connect with an agent, then taking the time to really put together a great query letter and start sending that out is better than waiting around for an opportunity to meet in person. I love that someone in the chat mentioned that Thriller Fest has a Zoom pitching event. So if you're interested in Zooming and you're writing mystery, thriller, suspense, you're in the Zoom or you're in the mystery thriller world, then that might be a great place for you to go. Okay. Context. I think this is the second C and this is you, Lance, right?
It is the second C, and it is me. Context is the part of the letter or the pitch that tells you where that book sits on the bookshelf. Who are the other books alongside it? So you kind of know what the genre or type of book you've written is.
Great. Do you want to answer a question really quick?
I would love to. Is there a question?
Yes.
Oh, what if I'm not sure if my book is technically young adult or adult? That's why I want an agent, so they can tell me, wrong. That's what you have to know going in. I'm sorry to be brutal. You need to know what your book is going in when you go to the agent, because there may be agents who do young adult and they don't do adult. And if your book is an adult novel and you send it to that agent and then the agent says, I only do young adult, this isn't right for me, you've actually lost your opportunity to get in the door.
I would also say that, you need to know what your book is, because that's going to be a big part of the way you talk about it and the way that you offer comparison titles to it, the way that you really give context, which is such an important part of it. But you also, I believe, should be open-minded to somebody saying to you at some point, actually, for these reasons, I think you should consider publishing this as young adult instead of adult. And once you get to a point where you're engaging with folks in the industry, they are going to have opinions about things like that could be really helpful to you. But, this question this makes me think of a situation that I've had in conferences where someone might say to me, hey, I am writing this book and my main character is 16 years old, and starts telling me about the story. And I say, well, is it young adult or adult? And they'll say, well, I want you to tell me that. And that's what I want you guys to avoid, because that's a pretty big turnoff for an agent who's being pitched. So instead of that, own it, figure out what you believe, be a reader in your category too, right? If you're thinking it might be young adult, hopefully you've read a lot of young adult and you're getting a sense of whether or not your book fits in that category. So it could change down the road, but I think as you're pitching, it's important to just really approach it with an idea in mind of what the book is.
So how does one figure out where their book actually sits and what part of the bookshelf they belong on?
I don't know.
Shall we offer some different genres for people to figure out? All right.
Yeah. Oh, we're going to come back.
Oh, do you want to go to that question?
No, we're going to do the other.
leads us in. Do you want to do the other thing first?
Yeah.
Okay. Becca, give me a fiction genre, go.
Okay, and guys, if we leave anything out, we want you to add it in the chat box, because we want participation. We want to feed off of your energy like little energy vampires. Okay, novel.
Vampire romance.
Science fiction.
Western.
Suspense.
Military thriller.
Mystery.
Cozy mystery.
Fantasy.
Inspirational fiction.
Women's fiction.
Amish romance.
Middle grade.
Did we say fantasy?
I did.
Oh, dark fantasy.
Okay. Why young adult YA?
Graphic novel.
What are we missing, guys? Come on. Historical fiction. Did we say that?
I think we did. YA fantasy.
YA
dystopian.
fantasy. Dystopian.
Also known as current day. Horror. Magical realism. These are good. Oh.
Good job. Steampunk. Afro cyberpunk. I love it.
Speculative
Two
fiction.
people at the same time said Afro cyberpunk. I love it. Grim dark. I've been hearing about that recently, that grim dark expression.
Rom-com.
Oh yeah, no one says, does anyone in publishing say chick lit anymore? I hope not.
We don't say chick lit anymore, but it is romantic comedy.
Right.
It's definitely having a moment again, a rom-com.
Someone in the chat box, tell us what grim dark is.
It's like trivia night.
I don't know what it is. I'll let someone drop it in there. Okay, so what about nonfiction?
Memoir.
Memoir, personal essay,
History.
self-help,
Diet.
cookery, as they say in England,
Christian living.
narrative nonfiction,
Science.
personal history,
Political science.
military history,
Nature.
travel,
Leisure.
business, management, entrepreneurial.
Oh, now you're just on a roll with your
I'm
business
just reading from the chat box.
Creativity.
Creativity, inspiration. Oh, you already, someone already
True
said that.
crime.
True crime. Good one. True
That
crime.
is a good
guys.
one.
Anything else? Political, for
Political.
sure. So you guys get it. There are a ton of ways that you can talk about a book versus saying fiction or nonfiction. But I would also say that at the end of the day, you know, you'll be so helped by exploring the bookshelves and figuring out where your book would sit, because that's also where you're going to grow your comparison titles and where you're going to potentially find some interesting inspiration for the way you talk about your book. So if any of those categories or genres didn't feel like they fit for you, then keep going. And, you know, we're always, especially at the Writers League, happy to help folks try to identify what it is that they're writing. So then that leads to the question, and I don't know if anyone put this in the chat box or not.
I feel like I saw it.
You did?
Yeah.
I saw beach read for sure.
I definitely saw beach read.
Mhm.
Upmarket fiction. This falls into a category with kind of a list of other terms that are thrown around: literary fiction, mainstream fiction, beach read, that are confusing. And I think what we should stress is these are terms that are really used by marketing and publicity departments and sales departments in publishing houses. These are insidery publishing terms. And I think you should try to avoid them and let your agent or your publisher assign it to your book. Becca, is that what you kind of feel about upmarket
and
fiction?
you know, I would agree. I mean, upmarket fiction, when you say upmarket fiction, I think of a book that is probably it's not literary, but it's got, you know, wonderful writing, but it also has like a compelling plot, and it's moving and has, you know, it's propelled forward in a way that sometimes literary fiction is more internal and less about the plot. But I think, you know, literary fiction, upmarket fiction, book club fiction is what you were saying upmarket fiction is, right? And the commercial fiction, award-winning fiction, mainstream fiction, beach read. Somebody put beach read in the box. I saw that. These are all terms that everybody, they're kind of subjective too, right? And so I think that if you're able to just stick with a very straightforward category, then that is the best way to go when you're trying to think of what your book is and how to categorize it. Does anyone have any other terms that they've heard in terms of like the way that people talk about or define their books that you want to throw out that you don't understand? If you want us to see if we understand them, you're welcome to add them to the chat. But if not, we'll just keep going. High concept. Yeah, that's a good one.
High concept,
too.
that's another good one. Yeah.
What do you say about high concept?
I think high concept is one of those publishing insider terms.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's also kind of almost hard to say my book is high concept because it almost sounds like you're giving your book a you know, really shiny label that maybe someone else should assign to it versus you assigning it, if that makes sense. But I think high concept, of course, is like something that hinges on a really unique and compelling plot point, right? So a guy gets stuck on Mars and he has to find out how to get off. Would you call that high concept, The Martian?
Yeah, it's definitely high concept, but I would never pitch my own book as high concept. Let your agent do that for you.
Yeah, exactly. So High concept's a good one. What other ones did we see in there that might be worth chatting about? Personal essays versus memoir and essays. I would say memoir and essays, I would assume, is probably more chronological and truly is like starting at one point and going somewhere, and feels like memoir, even if they're just linked but not a straight narrative, if that makes sense. And then personal essays could be essays on anything and aren't necessarily specific to a moment in your life or something that's happened in your life. What do you think, Lance?
I think that's right.
Do you like that?
I did like that. That's good. I'm going to take that, put it in my pocket and for later.
Cross genre. Yeah. So cross genre is exactly that, where you're sort of going from, you're crossing into, it's what? Psychological science fiction?
It's a science fiction romance. I actually
Right.
think, and Becky, you can correct me on this if you think I'm wrong, I think it would be okay to refer to your own book as cross-genre. I've written a book that crosses genres.
Yeah, for
I think
sure.
it's acceptable.
For sure. For sure. I think it'd be helpful. And I think
Yeah.
if you're going to do that, when we get to talking about comparisons, which we're about to do, I think, I would think of comparisons that are good examples of that. So either they are comparisons that cross genres, or they are two books in each of the genres and sort of this book meets this book. Yeah. In terms of saying upmarket fiction, everybody has to decide how they want to describe their work, of course, but what we're trying to make the point that it's often more about the way that a book is marketed and the way that the sales department or the publicity and marketing team talk about a book to the people they're talking to, versus the way that you as an author need to speak of your book in order to get an agent's attention. And sometimes with phrases like literary fiction, upmarket fiction, I think we assign those words to our projects because we want to make it clear that they're well written, that we're proud of the content. And so if I say literary or I say upmarket, then that means that they'll understand that it's well done. But that's not really the way that I think agents are reading query letters or thinking about a project when an author approaches them and says that it's upmarket or literary fiction.
I also think you're setting yourself up then, because what you're doing is you're saying, I've written upmarket fiction, and I, as the agent, am going to read it and say, this isn't upmarket, this is just fiction. Let the agent kind of assign that label to it. And I think particularly when it comes to literary, and I think we've talked about this before, Becca, that connotes some sort of degree or an award or something that backs it up that you've written literary fiction. If you are writing a first-time novel and you didn't go to a fancy writing school and you haven't won any awards, there's a possibility your book still is literary fiction and it could be fantastic. It could win awards, but let someone else decide that for you.
Yeah, I think literary fiction can be distracting unless you really feel that you understand the definition of literary fiction and you're using it, that your work falls into it. And sometimes literary fiction is in the eye of the beholder too. So I think that the point that we're trying to make, I think, here is that you have a limited amount of space, whether it's a limited amount of time when you're talking to an agent in person or a limited amount of real space in a query letter. And the less you throw out terms that might be distracting to an agent, the less you say something that might immediately have them thinking, oh, really? You're literary fiction, but I don't see an MFA program on your query letter. Or upmarket fiction, but you're talking about, X, Y, and Z. It's just going to distract them and it's not going to help you because then they might be thinking about that as they should be really looking at and thinking about your compel paragraph, which we're going to get to. So that's what we're saying. And ultimately you have to describe your letter in the way that feels the best, or your book in your project, the way that feels most true to you. But this is our best tip for you. Stay away from any terms that might be a little distracting. Okay, and there are a lot of questions coming in the box, but we are going to definitely let Evan gather those and we'll get them. Someone actually said this, I think, in the chat. Can I compare my book to a bestseller? Can you?
That's on you. It's important to make comparisons to successful books, to recognizable books. Instead of successful, let's say recognizable. I think that's important. But I think what you really want to shy away from are mega bestsellers. I think the chances of you having written, and no offense to anyone in this chat room, the next Crawdads is probably pretty slim. The next Harry Potter, the next Game of Thrones. Maybe you have, and that's fantastic. But again, you're setting yourself up then for just failure instead of success. But find a book that is recognizable, that maybe did well, that your book is similar to, that you can compare to, because comparisons are helpful, but they need to be accurate.
Yeah, so comparisons come in with context, because I think they give the agent a way to just immediately sort of anchor themselves in that letter, especially if it's a query letter, or if it's in person, it's a way to say, okay, I understand everything that's about to come after this. And now I can read the rest of these paragraphs with an understanding of what category this is, what genre it is, what the tone of the book might be, what what the ultimate story might lead to, whether it's going to be a happy ending or it's going to be a sad ending. So that's what comparisons can do for you. I think sometimes what writers do is they think comparison should be about sales, that it should be, I'm giving you a comparison title so you know how many copies of this book we're going to sell so that we can both get really rich off of it. But really, comparison titles are helpful because of the way they help you understand what the project actually is, what the voice is, what any number of other things. And so that's why when you're thinking about comparisons, you don't need to think about a book that is necessarily a big bestseller in your category. You want something that is recognizable for sure, but you want it to really help give additional information. So that somebody is learning more about your project in a really quick way because you compared it to something. I often say, if you were to say it's David Sedaris meets Game of Thrones, I often say that. Imagine if David Sedaris wrote Game of Thrones. For those of you who are familiar with either of those projects, you immediately understand that it's Game of Thrones, only it's funny, right? So I'm not saying you should use Game of Thrones, obviously, we just said not to, but it's meant to convey something in a really easy way without you having to use a ton of words to describe it. Does that make sense? Does that sound right, Lance?
It does, it does.
Okay, so when searching for comparison titles, how recognizable should you go? What if it's not something massive like Game of Thrones, but it has won a ton of awards and is lauded? What if they would hit the same reader with a similar genre theme, but are not similar at all in style? I think that's fine. I think, what I love about this question is you've obviously been thinking about it. It sounds like you're probably a reader in the genre that you are writing in. And I think that's a big part of figuring out how to think about comparison titles. And if you have a good comparison because of one thing, because it's a similar genre or a similar overarching theme, then maybe there's another title or author you can pair it with so that you can also show what the style is with a different comparison. Or you can just say it's similar to, it's potentially for readers of this book because of this reason, for this reason, but it's not as dark as that. It's got a lighter tone. And then immediately you've told me a lot in just that one sentence. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
There's another question that's been popping up a couple of times about how current does your comparison need to be?
Yeah, I mean, my opinion on that is that you want it to be something that has been published in the last 5 to 10 years. I don't know that I would go necessarily any further back than that, unless it's such a, it can get a little dicey to get into something that's just really a book that is, a cultural landmark or something that we all recognize, but it was published years and years and years ago. But I would say that you want it to be fairly current, and because you want to make sure it's something that potentially most agents are going to recognize, but also that it's sort of, by being more current, you can tell that it's something that still has a place in the market. If that
Yeah,
makes
that's what I was going to say. By going too deep, it's going to seem dated. And you want something that is current, for lack of a better word again.
And then Emily's asking about your tip about avoiding Game of Thrones type comparisons helps, but when I look for comparisons, the books and movies are so obscure. Is that an issue? And yeah, I think it is an issue to offer up comparisons that are too obscure. The thing to keep in mind if you're writing, especially if you're writing genre fiction, is that you are probably approaching agents whose depth of knowledge of that genre or category is probably deeper than most. So if I loved somebody asked about award-winning books, you can compare to a book that's received a lot of great reviews or maybe has a lot of really impressive authors who've quoted that book. Maybe it's a book that has won, you know, some of the awards that are in a particular category. And there's a good chance that one of the agents could possibly know what that book is, or many of the agents that you're approaching. But if you feel like you really had to dig to find it, then I wouldn't use it. And then your reference to movies is a good one too, because folks ask this sometimes also, like, should I compare my book project to a movie? And I think you can absolutely compare to other other pop culture, whether it's a television show or a movie. But I always think that if you're going to do that, that I would bring a book into it too. So I would, you know, it's Buffy the Vampire Slayer meets 50 Shades of Grey. I don't know. Just trying to think of something, which is also a movie now, of course. But, you know, so giving a pop culture reference, but then tagging it to or tying it to a literary work. All right, moving right along. So we wanted to mention that one of the biggest pieces of our unconference, for those of you who are still looking to figure out what you're writing, or who just want to meet other people in their genre, who want to explore, maybe you're exploring a new genre and you want to talk to folks about it. These are all the genre meetups that we're going to be hosting at the unconference, and we are hoping that a lot of people show up and that we can throw you into a ton of breakout rooms with other writers. So keep that in mind. If you haven't looked into the unconference, check it out. So Compel, Lance.
Becca, we've done connection.
Mm-hmm.
We started with context, but now we get to the meat of it. Now we get to compel.
The heart of it, buddy.
What do you want to tell us? Tell us about compel.
Well, so we'll start with this question, which was, shouldn't I include some mystery in my pitch? I don't want to give away the ending, do I? And yeah, I would agree that the point of the compel portion, the third C of your letter, is it's that sort of meaty, if we're talking about a query letter, it's that meaty 1 or 2 paragraphs that really offers enough information that it makes the agent want to read more. And if you're in a live pitch with somebody, whether it's on Zoom or it's in person, then it's that bit of, you know, really succinct but interesting text that you're going to offer that's going to make that agent want to ask you some questions in the moment and keep that conversation going and hopefully get you somewhere with that pitch. So we have some tips for Compel, and they would include that, you know, avoiding cliches is one of the things that I think, Lance, we were talking about earlier today. This is the hardest of the 4 C's. We recognize that, and it's the one that you're going to spend the most time on. And our biggest piece of advice to you would be to think about the 4 W's when you're doing it. Because if you look at these and you really think about what's most compelling about your story based on these 4 components, we think you can get yourself to a place where you can write a pretty great compel paragraph. Do you want to talk about who, Lance?
Sure. So who is not, as we said earlier, a cast of characters? Who's that one character or those 2 characters that are, or it's the band, thanks Evan, that is going to lead you through the book? Who is the person that leads you through? If you think about Hunger Games, Katniss is the person that is leading you through the book. There's multiple other characters in the story, but she's the primary one that leads you through. So it's your protagonist. There may be two, but I would not go much beyond 2 or 3, because once you get into 3 or 4 or 5 characters, it's a cast of characters.
And then when we talk about where, what we mean is its setting. And so not just geographical where. So my book takes place in Austin, Texas, or, if you think of Stephen King and you think of a lot of his books, but The Shining probably being the most famous one that has a setting that is not about necessarily the state that they're in. It's more about being in an old hotel that's closed for the season and snowed in. So what is the setting of your book? And is the setting the most compelling and interesting thing, or is it one of the most compelling things? Because that's what you're analyzing here. Who, where, when, and what, and which of these is the thing that you really want to highlight? Which one or two of these, probably not necessarily all of them, that you want to highlight when you're talking about your work. And I think, and setting can also be, think about whether you need to mention the setting in your compel, or if it doesn't really impact greatly what's happening in the story. And then if that's the case, you might back out and say, I don't need to tell everyone this is happening in Austin, because there's so much more that is more interesting that I need to share.
And I think when, the third W, falls in that same category. When can be very specific and very interesting. If you think about Jaws takes place around the 4th of July, which implies there's a lot of people at the beach. But to say when it's June 18th in Connecticut is not interesting to anyone. But if you could even boil it down to more specific things, like the day after a funeral, the day before a wedding, 6 months after the zombie apocalypse, those are very interesting, tangible things that you can grab onto. But if it's just a generic, it takes place now, maybe it's not an important W to include.
Yeah. And then what is really, and I think what comes down to what's happening at the moment that the story starts. What is the journey that your character is going to take? And I'm not telling you to include the synopsis when you think about the what, but the whole narrative, but I'm saying is where that book opens, that moment, compelling enough that that's where you'll start it. Nathan woke up in the morning on the last day of his life. What? I just made that up. But I'd like to see what Nathan's going to do with that 24 hours, So what that's often a great way to start a compel paragraph, is where that book is beginning and sort of dropping people into the action in the same way that they talk about for fiction. And I know we're focusing mostly on fiction here, but I think this all works for nonfiction as well. But that's what we're constantly saying. If it doesn't really get interesting until 100 pages in, cut the first 100 pages and start it where it gets interesting. And you can think of your compel paragraph in a similar way. I do want to mention this question that is a couple people are asking, rather than specific movie or book, would it work as well simply mentioning writers who your writing style resembles, keeping in mind that you wish yours was as well written? And yeah, that was similar to why I brought up David Sedaris, because I think that there are certain writers who have a style that, many writers obviously have a style all their own. And if you feel like their style, their tone, their voice evokes or is similar to what you're hitting, or the readers that they are reaching are going to be interested in what you're doing, then you can do that. But it's the same sort of reverse, in the way that you wouldn't only mention big bestsellers, you want to be careful of the names that you throw out, because it's a little hard to pitch yourself to an agent and say that you are writing I see Nicholas Sparks' name in the book or in the chat box. I think this is a really good point that Julia has. If you say the readers of Nicholas Sparks, but not so much, I've written a book that is, in the voice that Nicholas Sparks uses, for a clunky way to say it.
Or I'm inspired by the writing of blah, 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 whoever,
Yeah.
Nicholas Sparks. Or,
Yeah.
as opposed to in the style of.
We also really think that for Compel, you can go to all sorts of resources. We just threw up the New York Times bestseller list. Um, but yeah, we threw up the New York Times bestseller list because we wanted to remind you that it's a great place to find books that you can then do the best trick we can give you for Compel, which is looking at the jacket copy and getting an idea of how those books are being talked about, because publishers are working really hard to make that jacket copy compelling. So it can be a really great way to get inspired for your own work on Compel. So we gave you a couple examples here. Do you want me to read this one, Lance?
Sure. I have to move our faces out of the way.
Okay, fans of Barbara Kingsolver will love this stunning debut novel from a New York Times bestselling nature writer about an unforgettable young woman abandoned at age 10 to survive alone in the wild coastal marsh of North Carolina. For years, rumors of the Marsh Girl haunted Berkeley Cove, a quiet fishing village. Kaya Clark is barefoot and wild, unfit for polite society. So in late 1969, when the popular Chase Andrews is found dead, locals immediately suspect her. But Kaya is not what they say. A born naturalist with just one day of school, she takes life's lessons from the land, learning the real ways of the world from the dishonest signals of fireflies. But while she has the skills to live in solitude forever, the time comes when she yearns to be touched and loved. Drawn to two young men from town who are each intrigued by her wild beauty, Kaya opens herself to a new and startling world until the unthinkable happens. And Where the Crawdads Sing, Owens juxtaposes an exquisite ode to the natural world against a profound coming-of-age story and haunting mystery. Throughout thought-provoking, wise, and deeply moving, Owens' debut novel reminds us that we are forever shaped by the child within us, while also subject to the beautiful and violent secrets that nature keeps. Dun, dun, dun.
Dun, dun.
I listened to this audio because I wanted to know what the heck. That's a great point. Well, it's an interesting point. Jennifer is saying that she's read the book recently and she finds this a bit misleading. I don't know if I would agree with that. I actually think that there's a lot here that is true to the story. I don't think of the mystery part of it as quite forward in the book itself. I think it's a little less of a mystery and more of a coming of age story. But I also think that if your goal is to get an agent to say, I want to read more, then bringing forward whatever seems to be the most compelling piece of it, it's not misleading, I believe, as much as it's just shining a light on something that you believe is going to get someone to say, okay, I want to read more. And then I think very rarely would an agent circle back to you and say, but wait a minute, you made it sound like it was a haunting mystery, but it's not really a haunting mystery. So I wouldn't worry about that so much. I can see what they're doing here. Lance, what do you think of this?
It's very good. Obviously, and what you should be aware of is publishers have people who do this for a job, who write the copy. So, but I think catchphrases to watch when you're doing a query letter: stunning debut, fans of Barbara Kingsolver. Those are never things you would really say in your book. You could use Barbara Kingsolver as a comparison, but I would shy away from saying fans of, because you're implying that everyone will love your book in the way they love hers. You never want to call your own book stunning, obviously. And then that whole last paragraph is all publisher speak. That's everything the publisher's done to help to get people to want to read the book. However, I love this phrase. We are forever shaped by the child within us, while also subject to the beautiful and violent secrets that nature keeps. Is like a great kind of phrase to hang your hat on. Yeah.
Yeah, I think this middle paragraph is probably the first paragraph after the first sentence, and then the middle paragraph are really well done, and also exactly what you want to do with Compel. Give enough, but don't give too much.
And you're getting the who, you're getting the where, you're getting the what, and you're getting the when. They managed to fit in all four in this copy.
Okay, So we wanted to do a memoir as well, an unforgettable true story about the potential for mercy to redeem us and a clarion call to end mass incarceration in America from one of the most inspiring lawyers of our time. Bryan Stevenson was a young lawyer when he founded the Equal Justice Initiative, a nonprofit law office in Montgomery, Alabama, dedicated to defending the poor, the incarcerated, and the wrongly condemned. Just Mercy tells the story of EIL from the EJI, from the early days with a small staff facing the nation's highest death sentencing and execution rates through a successful campaign to challenge the cruel practice of sentencing children to die in prison and revolutionary projects designed to confront Americans with our history of racial injustice. One of EJI's first clients was Walter McMillian, a young Black man who was sentenced to die for the murder of a young white woman that he didn't commit. The case exemplifies how the death penalty in America is a direct descendant of lynching, a system that treats the rich and guilty better than the poor and innocent. So this isn't jacket copy, but it is what's on the website for Bryan Stevenson's book. And I think that in terms of writing memoir, I think the first thing we would say is the biggest difference between when you're writing a query letter for your own memoir versus when a publisher is throwing something on the cover of a book is that you're going to have a different point of view. So obviously a query letter for a memoir is going to be in the first person, and jacket copy for a book is going to be in the third person. But I would say that, memoir is an interesting category because comparisons, I think, are less about finding someone who's told the same story that you've told, because you're not likely to. It's your story versus all the other stories in the world. But it's helpful to find memoirs that really it is about the readers of. I think memoir is absolutely a place where you would say the readers of. The readers of Just Mercy will, this book will potentially appeal to those readers for this reason, because of some piece of the content, the theme, whatever it might be. Lance, do you have anything to say about memoir compelling?
I don't. I think you've hit the high points. Definitely first person is important. I'm, looking at this, I actually think the fourth paragraph is the best paragraph, and I would move it up higher if I were writing this, but that's just me.
Okay. So I think, all right, let's do credentials really quickly. No pressure, but do it really quickly, Lance.
Do it really quickly. If I've written academic articles and I'm pitching fiction, should I mention those? And I wouldn't waste space in my query letter with it. Obviously, if you're having a conversation with an agent and they say, have you written anything before, you can mention it. My fear with this would be you're setting yourself up so when they read it, they think, oh, this is very academic. I think it's important to say you have writing experience, but if it's not relevant, play it down. I
would agree 100%.
If I've self-published, I talk about that in my pitch. Again, it's a good excuse to say you have writing experience. I think you go either way on this. Becca, what do you think?
For all of these questions, this question, the question before it, and then also this question, if I'm writing a series, should I tell them about the books, the next books in the series? I think that there's a distinction between what you would include in a short pitch, what you would include in a query letter, and what you would include when you have a conversation with an agent who is potentially offering you representation. So if you are querying, you want to focus on the project you're focusing on. You want to make it as compelling as you can. You want them to ask you for more pages. They are going to make a lot of their decision based on the work itself, the writing. And then if somebody says to you, let's get on the phone and talk, I think those are the moments when you really talk about, you're able to have a back and forth about if you have self-publishing experience, if you have written articles, but they just weren't necessarily relevant to this piece of work, but you wanted to let them know, if you're writing a series and you're expecting it to be a series. So of course, for some genres, the expectation is that you probably are thinking about a series. But a lot of publishers are really concerned about books being standalone and not relying on a second book coming or the book after that. So I think just thinking in your mind, what are the things I have to include here that are going to be compelling, that are going to really get someone's attention? And what are the things that are for a deeper conversation? And so if you're writing fiction, you are going to include anything that is relevant to that. I have an MFA. I've won contests. I have won awards. I have been published. My fiction has been published elsewhere. That sort of thing. I always love it when people include, I'm a member of the Writers League of Texas, if they are, because that can also show that you're engaged in a larger literary community. But in terms of some of these other things, I think you can leave them out until you actually are having a conversation with someone. Someone has asked if memoir comps need to be recent as well. And I would say yes, that all comps, you know, our advice to you would be not to have something that's too dated. And what about mentioning experience working for publishing companies? I would say that,
I would say unless your book is set in publishing, it's really not, it wouldn't be very relevant.
Yeah, I mean, I would say if you've worked at publishing companies, my advice would be more about using those connections you might have to actually get, you know, a real introduction to perhaps an agent or two. But I don't think necessarily including it is going to make a difference either way, and probably is going to distract them in some ways. Like, oh, wait, who's this person? Oh, I know someone at Scholastic. Maybe I'll write to them and ask if they know this person, and then they're suddenly going down a rabbit hole that is not helpful to you. So I'll take one more. If you're writing a novel and you've had nonfiction books published, would you mention them? I think that if they've been published by traditional publishers and they have been published fairly recently, I think that it could be interesting to someone because it shows that you've had experience recently in traditional publishing, that you understand like what the process is. But if the nonfiction topic is so different from what you're writing now, I don't know that it needs to be something in a query letter. I don't know that someone reading that in your last couple of lines of a query letter is going to decide to ask for material based on that. And maybe there's a better use of that space that you could that you could give to a great comparison or other information that might be more helpful.
Yeah, I think anything you include in your query letter or your pitch has to be relevant. You know, my kind of cliche, avoid cliches, but the cliche I like to use is you need to Marie Kondo or Coco Chanel your pitch and take a big look at it and see like, what is the one piece I can throw out? What isn't relevant here? So if your nonfiction publishing is relevant, if you wrote math textbooks, but your book is about a math teacher, that's relevant writing. But if you've written math textbooks and your novel is about, you know, a gardener, it's not nearly relevant, and perhaps it's not a good way to waste space.
I do want to point out, Lance, that while Marie Kondo is within the last 10 years, I believe Coco Chanel is a bit of an older comparison.
Is where you're going with that? Timeless?
So it's like you were saying Marie Kondo meets Coco Chanel. Imagine that meeting. How lovely would that be? Yeah. Imagine Marie Kondo trying to clean out Coco Chanel's closet. Okay. Sorry, guys. So I wanted to circle back to this question now that we've kind of gone through the 4 C's, which was what would you include in an in-person pitch that you wouldn't include in a query letter? And so our thought is that when you're thinking in person, to us, context and compel are probably the most important things. Query letter, you're going to be including all 4 of those C's. So that's one way to think of it as you're preparing for those of you who are doing Thriller Fest, who are going to be pitching folks in person on Zoom. I think really just getting into the context and the compel is the ticket, and then see where the conversation goes. All right. Who's ready to have some interactive fun?
Let's do this.
Don't all say it yes at once. Heidi's ready.
Heidi's like, bring it on.
We'll just see people slowly start dropping off. not me.
I'm not interacting.
Okay, so we're gonna try something we've never done before. I might keep making my head really big. That we've never done before. Oh, the answer is you are. Um, so what, I can't remember what the next, okay. So you guys all received some mysterious, oh, you're the game master. You talk, Lance.
Take it. All right. So the 4 C's, again, connection, context, compel, credentials. You were emailed before tonight's festivities, a line of text, a paragraph that falls into one of those 4 categories. So we're going to take, there's 2 different books, 4 for each. We're going to take each of those pieces and build a pitch from it. So we're going to ask you to raise your hand when the time is appropriate, when we ask for a specific C, and then I believe Evan is going to give you microphone privileges.
He's going to give you the ability to speak aloud.
Everyone will hear you. If you don't want to be heard, don't raise your hand. And we will go through and reveal the 4 C's for 2 different books. So the first C is connection. Who believes they cannot see you? That is correct. Only microphone. Who believes they have a connection? Raise your hand.
I read in Poets and Writers that you're looking for novels featuring strong female characters overcoming obstacles.
Well done.
Oh my goodness, that came out.
Kelly
That was like a
nailed
voice
it.
from God. Like it just came out of nowhere. Oh wow. Yes, it's right there. Good job. I read in, we'll say, Poets and Writers that you're looking for novels featuring strong female characters. Perfect connection.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Who believes they have the context to go with that?
Context that would lead off of this.
Raise your hand.
Sentence. We want confident writers out there. We want people who are like, I got this.
This is Karen.
Karen, can you speak to us? Karen is muted. Can you unmute her? Karen, you're up. It's our grand experiment. Evan. No, we can't hear you.
We can't, Karen.
Maybe your microphone isn't working. We might have to let someone else do it, Karen.
Oh, Karen.
Sorry, Karen. All right, Evan.
Karen, we still give you big props.
Yeah, we appreciate your anyone else have a context that goes with this?
That's it. Karen's right.
Lance, read it aloud for Karen.
So, my psychological suspense novel is about 2 women, a con woman and her heiress Mark, who share a history, although the heiress isn't aware of their entangled past.
Dun, dun, dun. Let's see.
And let's
Karen
reveal
is
it.
right. She's right. Okay.
All right.
So this is context why, Lance?
This is context because it is placing, where does this book live on the shelves? It's a psychological suspense novel about 2 women.
Right. And it's giving me a little bit more, but really it's that psychological suspense novel. Love it. Who's got a compel? Someone raise their hand.
That's so exciting.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Hi, Kelly.
Cool. Hey. All right. Nina's mother tricked her into the family business, con games, and stealing from rich kids in LA. And Nina, in turn, enlisted her wily Irish boyfriend, Lachlan. When Nina's mother becomes ill, the two set out for one final hustle in order to raise money for her care. Their target is Vanessa, a social media influencer with a tragic family history in addition to a secret past with Nina. The three lives collide in an estate on the shores of Lake Tahoe with twists and turns and double crosses from all sides.
Oh, that sounds so
Dun, dun, dun. Lance wrote that, guys.
I wrote that myself.
I mean, I might have tweaked it a little bit. Great, compelling. I thought that was really compelling.
That was very compelling.
Yeah, and you know, keep in mind your compel is going to match your context. So for a psychological suspense novel, that's great. It's already published.
It's already, this is a real book, y'all.
Yeah, it's a real book, y'all.
We'll reveal
We're gonna
what
let
it
you
is
guess.
after.
We're gonna let you try to guess what it is in case anyone has read it. Okay, last thing. Does anyone have?
Credentials.
This is a little bit of a trick because I think that the credentials could work for either of them. So who thinks they've got the right credentials for this? Pamela.
Oh dear, now I've got to find it again. It disappeared from my screen. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. This is our dream come true, Lance and I, to be like radio hosts or podcast hosts and have call-ins. People call in and talk to us.
It's the morning show we've always wanted.
Where are you calling from today, Pamela?
I just had this email. Now I can't see it.
Uh-oh.
I'm sorry. I can kind of remember it, but I can't see it.
Let me ask you a question. Did it include a list of magazines?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Nice job, Pamela.
I've been published by Elle.
Yep.
LA Times.
I'm going to help you out, Pamela.
Thank you. There you go. I am an essayist and journalist, having written for Elle, Self, the LA Times, Salon, and numerous other publications.
Good job. Thank you. All right. And that's a great credentials. I mean, you know, it gives me immediately a little information about you, and you've been published by national magazines. So perfect. Does anyone have any comments? Like if I'm looking at this and I were to pick out anything that I might change, I would say the one thing that is missing from this entire query is any sort of comparison title. And I think that that's okay, because actually when you say psychological suspense, I know what it is and I don't really necessarily need a comparison, and you just might find yourself comparing it to something that isn't helpful to you because you've already got it nailed. So sometimes with a really specific context, you don't need to use a comparison. I think you did a great job, Lance. There's a lot of information in the Compel. There's a lot of names in the Compel, but I think that even those aren't distracting. It all kind of, it works. Kudos.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks.
All right. We're going to do one more. Does anyone have a guess of what this book is? Anyone know? Is it a bestseller? I think it is, right?
Did it hit the list for a week, maybe? I don't know. Nicole Kidman has optioned it.
Nicole Kidman? Nicole Kidman?
Nicole Kidman. I'm guessing she'll play the mom?
I don't know.
You don't know. I don't know. She could be Vanessa.
Okay, so it's called Pretty Things by Janelle Brown, and it came out, what, a couple months ago? January?
No. It just came out May.
Just came out in May, you say?
Yeah.
Okay.
Available on audio from Penguin Random House Audio.
Okay. Book number 2. So secretly, Evan has sent the connection for book number 2 to some people in the chat privately. So is there anyone who has received the connection to book number 2? We didn't want to confuse you by asking for the connection and having someone pick this one first. So anyone who got it, who is willing to share it. Evan instead has sent it to all of us. And, no, sorry. He's sending it to the panelists as well. I got it. Okay.
Got it.
Who's gotten the connection who wants to share it? Check your chats, people.
Chat, chat, chat.
Someone raise their hand.
Hands up, hands up.
I am a fan of your client and fellow Texan, Attica Locke.
Woot, woot.
Mm.
Yeah, that is like straightforward connection, right? And that's something that we didn't really talk a lot about, but I think that that can be a great way to connect to an agent, is by not racking your brain for other comparison titles, but actually just speaking directly to their client on their list and making a connection that way. And you're not even necessarily saying that your book is like Attica Locke's book. You're just saying, I'm a fan of your client and she's a fellow Texan. Anybody have the context for this? We have some hands. I know, I love Attica Locke too, Hillary. She's a really wonderful writer. Joe.
Well, while my memoir is very different from the fiction Attica writes, you'll find the same East Texas setting in my personal story of finding an identity and a voice as a young Black gay man from the South.
Dun, dun, dun. Perfect. That was a little, we gave you a little bit there because you knew the Attica already. So it was probably the next sentence, but yeah, that is exactly the context. And look at that. It's a memoir, and it's set in East Texas, and it's the identity and voice, young Black gay man from the South. I think that this is a perfect, really succinct context.
And you'll notice that both of the contexts for these books opened with what type of book it was. That's what context does. Where does it live on the shelf? It's a psychological suspense. It's a memoir.
Yep. All right. Who has the compel paragraph for this book?
I do.
Jennifer?
Let me pull it up. Hold on. There we go. All right. It says, a white boy in my class called me the F word for the first time when I was 12 years old, and it was a relief to finally hear it said out loud. In our apartment, my Buddhist mother, a single mom juggling 2 jobs, 3 if you count the unpaid job of raising me, always stopped short of talking about what was pretty obvious to us both. As my God-fearing grandmother put it during my church-filled visits with her in Memphis, I was, quote, worldly and in need of saving. I spent years of my life searching for the answers to the questions my body was asking, in secret chat rooms on the internet, in the pages of forbidden magazines, in library carols with strange men, and even more years trying to find a place for myself within my family and my community after those answers were found. My memoir is a series of vignettes detailing that journey.
Perfect. Thank you, Jennifer. Great reading. Yeah, I mean, I'll confess, I wrote this compel paragraph, and I gotta say, I think I did a pretty good job with it.
I think you did.
Right?
Yeah.
I think it does. Yeah, it sparks interest, right? And you realize you know what I like? I like details like, as an agent reading something like this, I like details like my Buddhist mother, right? And that's just curious to me, a Buddhist mother, and you're being raised in East Texas. So tell me more about that. I was in a secret chat room, pages of forbidden magazines, library carols with strange men. Like, it takes it a little bit further with descriptive. And then also the grandmother calling him worldly, and you sort of get an idea of what he was dealing with as a kid, as he was trying to find his way and not getting a lot of support. So I think it's a good compel.
I really like this part too. A single mom juggling 2 jobs, 3 if you count the unpaid job of raising me, because it's a little wink in there, because initially I was like, oh, you don't need that. But then the 3 if you count, but I like that because it shows a cleverness in the writing of the book.
Yeah, and he has a wonderful voice. Okay, who has the credentials? Someone out there does. unless all the people with credentials dropped off. Anyone? All right, we'll reveal them. Lance, will you read it?
I am a published and award-winning poet with one collection out, Prelude to a Bruise, Coffeehouse Press, 2014. I earned my MFA at Rutgers University, Newark. Oh, Ashley, I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry, Ashley. We didn't see your hand. So interesting. And kind of, I love the reference to the poetry here too, because I think you would say that if you had a collection of poetry out and you're pitching a memoir, you would mention your poetry, of course, regardless of the fact that there are two different formats. But when you hear poet, I think you also make some assumptions about, oh, wow, this is a memoir written by a poet. There's going to be some really probably interesting and beautiful language in it. So it only serves him well to mention that as well. And then he mentions the MFA because that is relevant too. If you're trying to convey that it's more of a literary memoir, perhaps, without just coming out and saying literary memoir. Does anyone know what this book is? Yeah. Yeah, so this book is really special, and Said Jones is a poet, and this is his memoir, How We Fight for Our Lives. It came out last year, and it won so many awards and accolades and praise. So we also just wanted to mention that our friends at the Texas Book Festival are going to be having a conversation with Said Jones on Thursday, the 25th, ahead of our kickoff to our unconference. So we're actually partnering with them and sending as many of the registrants from our unconference to that event. And then we're looking to somewhere within the weekend of the unconference, find a time for anyone who wants to, who is able to hear him speak, to have like a mini kind of book club in the unconference weekend where we can all get together and talk a little more about the event. So check it out. It's going to be really great. It's next weekend. So we're going to run through some really quick do's and don'ts. You guys are so patient to stick around with us this long, but we don't want to keep you too much longer. So this was a question that kind of kicked off the do's and don'ts, I think. How much personality is too much personality? Did you write this question, Lance?
I think I did. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I would say that, it's really hard for personality to come across well in a query letter. Sometimes if we try too hard and put too much in, it ends up being a turnoff. So I would definitely, it's another good reason to have someone read your query letter. So if you think you might be overpowering it with your personality, then that's probably a sign that you need to tone it down a little bit. And the same thing with in-person pitches. I think it is important to connect with people and to show them, your unique self. But I also think, especially in that setting where you're doing a very quick pitch, it can be overwhelming if someone comes on sort of at 150%. What are your do's and don'ts, Lan?
I would say don't pitch more than one project. Pick your favorite, the one you're most proud of, the one you think is the best, and pitch it. If you get an opportunity to have a conversation with an agent and they ask, do you have something else? Then you can talk about it, but I would pick one and go with your lead.
And I'll say, do think about your word choices. We all find ourselves making some silly or avoidable choices. So first debut novel would not be something you would say. Fiction novel, I still find myself sometimes throwing that together and realizing I shouldn't be. And fiction memoir, of course. So keep those things in mind.
Don't share distracting extras, including the jacket for the book that you decoupaged yourself. Make it focus on the work.
So how much oh no, that we already did that one. Don't say that your book will appeal to everyone, because that's the sort of line that is hard to really live up to, because most books do not appeal to everyone. And also it's sort of in keeping with this book no one's ever written this book before. This is a one-of-a-kind book. It's hard to live up to that as well.
Don't use fancy fonts or emojis or embedded GIFs or wingdings in your letter. This is the same thing we say in a in-person pitch. Don't wear your flashy cat sweater. Don't wear a big floppy hat. Like, make it about the work.
Do your homework, know the submission guidelines for the agency and agent you're going to query. So just keep in mind that you want to go to the website, do the research, and just know exactly what they're expecting from you. Because some people, unfortunately, they're all going to want something different for the most part. So they may want a particular, you know, a synopsis in the body of the email, something else attached, and just depending on who you're going to approach, you don't want to make the mistake of getting rejected before you even start because you didn't follow the rules.
Do be polite and professional in your correspondence because it is a professional correspondence.
Do you ask someone or multiple someones to proofread your letter? Yeah, very important.
Do address your letter to just one person. Don't CC several other agents at the agency. Find your primary and go to that one person.
Do be open-minded, whether it's in person or even as a response to a query. Be open-minded to any feedback that you may receive, because that is pretty special when an agent bothers to respond to a query with some actual concrete thoughts. So just be open-minded to it. You don't have to follow everything someone says to you in a person pitch or in a written pitch, but it's good to keep yourself open.
Do have fun. Have fun exploring your pitch and exploring your work through the pitch. It's a good opportunity to write more about what you've already written.
Do take advantage of the resources and meetings available during our unconference. That's just our throwback to saying we hope that you'll be at the unconference.
Don't query until your full manuscript is ready if it's fiction, and if it's nonfiction or a memoir, to have the proposal ready. Don't query someone and say, well, I'm only 10 pages in, but I think it'll be great.
Don't advertise your queries on social media. I think that this is about, you know, shaming or not, you know, reaching out to agents on social media that you've just queried in hopes that you might engage them in some way, when what you really should do is just sit back and let them respond to you the way they're going to respond to you.
Be respectful of agents' time and don't expect an immediate response.
This one isn't about querying or pitching, but do wear a mask and be healthy. That was our last do. And then we just wanted to mention, let's see if I actually built this into the slideshow or not. I don't know if I did. That might have been our last one. Oh, so at the unconference, Lance and I are going to be together again, for those of you who can stand it, on Friday. So starting at 4 p.m., we're going to do an unpitch lab for anyone who wants to join us. So we'll be gathering as many people as we can in a room on Zoom, and we'll probably throw people into breakout rooms at some point, but we'll just give everybody the chance to talk about their work. And, you know, you can do a refined pitch if you're ready to do that, if you want to try that, or you can just talk to other people about the ways, let them pitch their work to you and give them some feedback, whatever you want to do. It's just meant to bring folks together and make sure that we kick off the whole weekend with a nice session for just you to get to mingle and have fun. Well, the whole weekend is really going to be sessions for you, mingling and having fun. So there is that. And the last thing is just a reminder that we have a conference coming up. So Evan, are there any questions that we didn't answer that you want to point out to us so that we can make sure that we do? Evan's going to hop on, everyone.
Hi there.
There he is.
So forgive me if I didn't hear you guys answer these questions, but I've been keeping track of some that I just see as they pop up. So I'm going to start chronologically at the beginning. Someone asked that they understand they need a pitch for their book, but should they also have a pitch for themselves as an author?
Yeah, I would say that that's really, you know, the credentials that we talked about is how you're going to speak about yourself as the author of that particular work. I think there's two different ways you pitch yourself. It's for the work itself, And then also just for in general, you know, if you have larger credentials that maybe speak to you as somebody who's a part of the writing community, I think that's where your experience in working in publishing might be interesting. And it's sort of the difference between what do you need in a query letter? I think it's the shorter, more relevant credentials. And what do you, the pitch, the shorter pitch? And what do you need when you're meeting someone in person? That's going to be a longer, more detailed, be ready to just talk about who you are and what experience or interests you have that might be interesting to share with an agent.
All right. Next question is, should we include excerpts or quotes within the synopsis?
I did answer that one, and I said that I wouldn't.
How much does word count influence an agent's interest with a query letter?
That's a great question. I think word count, what I usually say for word count is unless an agent specifically asks you to include it in your letter, I wouldn't include it, partly because some people might have their own kind of predetermined rules about how long or how short something can be. And you might just end up distracting them with the length. But there are going to probably be some agents who will ask you to include the word count, and so you will. And you know, in terms of the count itself, I just think you have to, you know, you need to write the book that you need to write, but especially if your book is skewing much higher in the word count than would be expected, then you might want to do some real revising before you start submitting it and get those words down a little bit.
Someone asked about examples for good pitches.
Oh, we gave you our example.
I feel like we got those at the end.
We did.
That question came before we got there.
Didn't you hear us say how good our pitches were? What is the question, actually?
I mean, it was, the question said, word for word, you gave a lot of examples of bad pitches. How about some, like, can you give us some examples of good pitches?
I think we just had...
because the cast of characters and the theme and that stuff. Yeah. So that was our intention with pointing out the jacket copy that we shared, and also the pitches for the memoir and the novel at the end, was to give you guys some good examples. We hope that helped.
And then finally, just a small question. Is it best to send a query letter by email or snail mail?
Well, right now, email. Nobody's getting any snail mail.
Don't send anything snail mail right now. But yeah, that goes back to the submission guidelines. Just really do your homework and check out the agency guidelines. And I would imagine if there are agencies that ask for snail mail, they probably have addressed COVID-19 on their website or somewhere and are telling you either not to send anything right now or to send it via email. But check out the submission guidelines for sure. And that's it, Evan?
That's it.
Well, we really appreciate you guys. Thanks for being here and hanging out with us. And we'll just say that if anyone wants to stick around and has any questions that they want to throw up in the chat box, we will happily answer them. But we also will make this recording available on our YouTube channel at some point in the near future. And we really hope, I really hope that you'll sign up for the Unconference. It's absolutely free. It's our gift to the writers we love out there, you guys, and it's going to be a lot of fun. So check it out for sure.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for being here. Okay.
Question.
What if you have trouble finding comparison titles? That's the problem I've been running into. I know. Then maybe comparison titles aren't what you're going to use. You know, the two examples that we gave, Lindsay, of the psychological suspense and then also the memoir, we didn't use any comparison titles for either of those. And it's because we were able to just really clearly say what the category was. So maybe that's just what you need to do, is say, this is X, this is high fantasy, or this is whatever it might be that you're writing, if you really can't find those comparison titles. But I also think sometimes we limit ourselves when we think about comparison to really specifically, this book is about this, so my comparison titles are also about this, and you can kind of widen your reach and say, is there a tone of voice that I can compare this to? Is there the journey of a particular character that's comparable, that I could cite another book because of that? And then you can just justify it and explain what it is that you're comparing to this book because of this particular thing.
Also, Lindsay, if you know what your genre is and you're able to go to the genre meetups next weekend, other people may have suggestions for you. Oh, this reminds me of this that I've read. It could just be something you don't know.
So Callie, it was my question about good pitches. It wasn't the way good queries aren't the way you would speak to an agent if you grab them in the elevator. First of all, don't grab them in the elevator.
Don't do it.
Don't grab them in the elevator. Should we be practicing our query context in Compel to recite on demand? Yeah, so that's what we want you to do is when you're thinking about an in-person pitch, you're gonna have a really probably limited amount of time to at least initially start talking to this person. And I would be thinking about context and Compel. And if you're grabbing someone in person, I would say, hi, I think grabbing people after you've seen them at some point in the event, maybe you saw them on a panel, they said something that resonated with you. Hi, I saw you on X panel. I loved what you said about debut authors doing Y. I wanted to mention my young adult novel to you and just tell you a few words about it. And then they'll probably say, yeah, that's great. Tell me a few words. Like, you don't have to rush it all out immediately, because you can actually give them a moment to say either, I'm so sorry, I'm late for something, catch me later, or yeah, tell me a few words. And then you're going to go into those couple of sentences or so that you have from your Compel that's going to keep them, it's going to give them a little more information that's going to interest them ideally. And they may ask you more questions, and then you're in a conversation. But in all seriousness, elevator pitches, I think you really want to try to catch agents when they're in a space where they're going to be comfortable and they're not going to feel cornered. And elevators and bathrooms and other such places. I have been pitched in a bathroom, a project. So that can be really awkward. Anyone else? No? All right. Well, thanks for being here, guys. Have a great night. Thanks for sticking around. Lance, thanks for staying up so much past your bedtime. It's
Thanks
almost
for having
11
me.
o'clock where you live.
I know.
In your Connecticut home. All right, guys, have a great night. We're gonna sign off. We'll see you at the unconference. Lance.
I'll see you at the unconference.
I'll see you at the unconference. All right.
Not before. Okay.
Not before.
Bye.
All right.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye. Bye.
Good night. Bye.
Good night.
Good night. Bye.